For more than 60 years, researchers have been digging into one big question: what makes us say yes? And it turns out the science is actually surprisingly clear. I mean, think about it. Our lives are just overloaded. We don't have the time or the mental bandwidth to analyze every single decision that comes our way. So to cope, what do? We rely on mental shortcuts. These shortcuts are basically universal rules of thumb that steer our decision-making, especially when we're feeling overwhelmed or just plain uncertain. My research has boiled it all down to 6 key shortcuts that guide pretty much all human behavior. And if you can understand them, you've got the key to persuasion. All right, so here's how we're going to break it all down. First, we'll get into the psychology of yes. Then we'll dive into reciprocity and scarcity. After that, we'll tackle authority and consistency, and then liking and consensus, before we wrap things up with a look at how to use all this ethically. Okay, so before we jump into each principle one by one, let's just get a quick high-level view of the framework we're about to unpack. Big 6, all scientifically validated principles. We're going to cover reciprocity, scarcity, authority, consistency, liking, and consensus. Let's kick things off with the first pair. All right, let's get into our first section. We're going to see how the deep-seated obligation to give back and that nagging fear of missing out really shape the choices we make. So the first principle is reciprocity. It's super simple, right? If someone does you a favor, you feel this powerful, almost overwhelming obligation to return it. It's like it's hardwired into our social DNA. And this study from the restaurant world illustrates the point perfectly. Giving diners a single mint with their bill increased tips by about 3%. Okay, not bad. Giving them 2 mints, that jumped to a 14% increase. But check this out, this is the kicker. When the waiter gave 1 mint, started to walk away, then turned back and said, you know what, for you nice people, here's an extra one, the tips shot up by 23%. So it wasn't just what was given, but how it was given. It felt personalized and unexpected. Next up, we've got scarcity. This one is also incredibly simple. When something becomes less available, our desire for it just goes through the roof. I mean, just look at the Concorde effect. When British Airways announced they were ending their supersonic flights, ticket sales skyrocketed the very next day. Now, had anything about the flight changed? Nope. Not the speed, not the service, not the price. It simply became a scarce resource. So the lesson here is that it's not enough to tell people about the benefits they'll get. You also have to point out what's unique about your offer and, crucially, what they stand to lose if they don't act fast. Okay, let's move on to our next pair, authority and consistency. Now we're going to look at how our trust in experts and our deep-seated desire to be consistent can be incredibly powerful motivators. The third principle is authority. We are just much more likely to say yes to people who we see as credible, knowledgeable experts. You know, you see medical diplomas on a doctor's wall, you tend to trust their advice. What's really fascinating here is how easy it can be to establish that authority. One real estate agency saw a 20% jump in appointments and a 15% increase in signed contracts from one tiny change. They just had the receptionists mention the agent's credentials and experience before putting the call through. So the key is to signal your expertise before you ever make your request. Okay, the next principle is consistency. We all have this deep, almost obsessive need to be consistent with things we've already said or done. This study is a fantastic example. Researchers asked homeowners to put a big, pretty ugly "Drive safely" sign on their front lawn. And as you'd expect, very few agreed. But in a nearby neighborhood, they tried something different. First, they asked people to put a tiny little postcard in their window, a super small initial commitment. Then, 10 days later, they went back and asked about the big sign. And guess what? Compliance shot up by 400%. That tiny first step made all the difference. Now, this works best when those commitments are voluntary, active, and public. For example, one health center cut down on missed appointments by 18% just by having the patients, not the staff, write down their own appointment details on the card. That active commitment made them feel more accountable. It just shows how vital it is to get that small initial yes. Let's move on to our last pair. We'll see how our relationships with others and our natural tendency to follow the crowd can guide our decisions in powerful ways. The fifth principle is liking, and this one's beautiful in its simplicity. We are just way more easily persuaded by people we like. It's really that straightforward. The science tells us there are 3 main factors that drive liking. First, we like people who are similar to us. Second, we like people who pay us genuine compliments. And third, we like people who cooperate with us toward a shared goal. That builds a real sense of partnership. And this is incredibly powerful, even in a business context. In an online negotiation study between MBA students, one group was told, "Time is money, get straight down to business." They only reached an agreement 55% of the time. But the other group was told to first share some personal info and find a similarity. The result? A whopping 90% reached a successful agreement. And our final principle is consensus, which you might know as social proof. The idea here is that, especially when we're uncertain about something, we look to the actions of others to figure out what we should do. This hotel towel study is a perfect demonstration. At first, hotels used a standard environmental message, and they got about 35% of guests to reuse their towels. Then they tried a consensus message. 75% of guests in this hotel reuse their towels, and boom, compliance jumped by 26%. But the most effective message of all was one that said 75% of people who stayed in this very room reused their towel. That super relevant message increased reuse by 33%. We follow the lead of people who are just like us. Okay, so we've covered a ton of ground. What's the big picture here? Let's put it all together and see what this means for you. These 6 principles, they're not about manipulation. They're about small, practical, and often totally costless changes you can make to ethically increase your influence. So let's recap. Reciprocity, be the first to give. Scarcity, highlight uniqueness. Authority, demonstrate your credibility. Consistency, get those small commitments. Liking, find similarities. And consensus, point to what others are already doing. These really are the secrets from the science of persuasion. The power behind these principles is absolutely undeniable. So the real question isn't whether they work, but how you will apply them, ethically and effectively, in your own life.